So this is definitely a very serious day for me. Back when I was 16, I did the whole volunteer firefighter thing. And while doing that, I had always dreamed of becoming a New York City firefighter. Then came my senior year of high school. And with that, 9/11/2001. Watching that day unfold and seeing the bravery that was shown, it just absolutely sealed the deal for me right then and there. I knew I had to be a part of that. And then a few years later, I got that job. Now, years into everything I have done and I am still doing, I realized something that looking back on things, the ham radio response to 9/11, the significant MCOM side of things was never really covered. And maybe even more importantly, it was never really critically debriefed for future relevance. And that's what we're going to be diving into today. So on 9/11 and in the weeks that followed, amateur radio operators demonstrated their readiness, perhaps as never before. While no training program could have fully prepared any of the ARES and RACES members for an event of that magnitude, ham volunteers, as we've seen throughout history, as usual, they stepped up immediately, offering their stations, their skills, and time to help in any way they could. From a communications and preparedness standpoint, 9/11 differed radically from weather-related emergencies, which is kind of like the ham guys' bread and butter. There was no advance warning, and cellular and wired networks quickly collapsed when the World Trade Center's antennas went down. As federal, state, and local officials declared emergencies, RACES, ARES, and countless individual hams found themselves activated. Not just in New York City, but there was also Washington, D.C., Pennsylvania, and then actually across the entire nation, because nobody knew what might happen next. Within 5 minutes of the first plane striking, the New York City ARES net sprang to life on the WB2 ZSE, which is 147.0 megahertz repeater. District Emergency Coordinators and RACES radio officer Charles Hargrove, whose call sign is N2NOV, assumed command, directing operators to support the New York City Office of Emergency Management, and then a little bit later on, the American Red Cross.
Collapsed and everything went black in here. People were just dumbfounded. Everybody's trying to talk at once, and people pick up their cell phones and couldn't get through.
It was a day guys like Charlie Hargrove and Mark Phillips trained for. They communicate on amateur radios, and when disaster strikes, they get messages through when no one else can.
When it finally happens, you just go into automatic. You don't even think about it.
The city was virtually paralyzed, and ham radios were about the only way to talk. So Charlie, Mark, and some 250 volunteers spread out, backing up the city's systems 24 hours a day.
Down at ground zero.
They got word to frantic relatives, worked at shelters, even pulled people off the street.
Now, all this was going on, you had the ham volunteers shadowing city officials. They managed medical traffic, stood by hospitals, and really provided backbone communications, because when the towers collapsed, phone service went down, cell service went down, and even pagers failed. Yes, pagers were prevalent on 9/11. The ham volunteers that responded to this, they had to be completely self-sufficient, having their dual band VHF, UHF radio, their own power supplies, magnet antennas, coax, cables, protective boots, protective masks, Latex gloves, bottled water, extra batteries, and snacks were all on the must-have list for those that were stationed near Ground Zero, which are probably some good things you want to consider putting in your own kit for disaster response if you're planning on doing that. As far as their shifts, you're looking at 12-hour shifts that they worked, and it wasn't just about the shifts because they had to obtain credentials into the restricted area, which required considerable time and effort. Now, while this was happening, right across the river in Jersey City, their volunteers were backing up their own hospitals, their own shelters for all the anticipated overflow from Manhattan, and they were ready to relay critical information from the Red Cross stations. They actually had a specific Red Cross net on the NO2EL repeater, which is 145.37 megahertz, and then they had a separate Aries net on the WS2Q repeater, which was linked directly to that New York 147.0 megahertz repeater. The Jersey City Amateur Radio Club even stepped in after their own repeater, which was atop the World Trade Center, was lost. In the days that followed, operators refined the procedures and launched a World Trade Center disaster relief communications website to help coordinate volunteers more effectively. They found that by limiting net participants to those who had proven their competence and teamwork, they reduced chaos and maximized efficiency. And really, that cohesive approach, just selecting reliable operators and defining clear roles, proved as vital to the mission's success as any piece of equipment. Now, this net, or op, whatever you want to call it, lasted weeks. And this hits to me on something that I think is often overlooked in emergency comms, and that is using this whole response as the example. The duration of an activation doesn't always correlate with the intensity of the incident. And here's why I think this net, and possibly one that you can be involved in the future, might have lasted so long. And I think the first thing here would be that of infrastructure uncertainty. Even if the buildings or, building that is attacked in the future is primarily residential, it might have housed critical systems. They put data centers, COPS hubs, or even government offices everywhere. And that uncertainty alone can absolutely justify the need for extended monitoring. And another situation or another reason may just be for the very real need of the continuity of government or even business operations. If the attack disrupted key operations, even if it's symbolically that they're disrupted, agencies may have kept or keep ARES or RACES active to maintain readiness for the cascading effects from all that going on. And I think a huge reason for planning on the fact that you may have to keep your comms plans active for extended durations could just be as an intel-driven precaution. Sometimes the duration is not dictated by what did happen, but by what might happen next. If there was a concern about follow-up incidents, keeping nets active just makes sense. So if you've thought about any of this, let me know in the comments section about, things that I may have missed. There is just the very realistic result to this whole thing, to the fact of, we had all these preparations and things in place, but when you take a step back and you're looking at 9/11, what actually did happen, there were a lot of fatalities, but there weren't a lot of casualties. Hospitals didn't get overwhelmed like they were planning on them doing, and all the shelters didn't get overrun like they were planning on them doing, because there weren't a whole lot of people to treat. And that was kind of what I was going off into, the fact of where the size of the duration doesn't necessarily dictate the response. It may just have to be because of what might happen next. So let me know your thoughts on all this, guys. On 9/11, it's a special day. It's a day of remembrance. So keep all those affected in your hearts. Say a prayer for them. And with that, we'll see you on the next one. Be safe.